Good morning, everyone. I hope you guys have had an amazing weekend. I know when it wasn't raining, it was actually kind of beautiful, kind of nice out there. So I hope you guys enjoyed your weekend. But enough of that. We have a huge show to jump into and a lot of stories to get to. So, first thing we're going to be looking at is actually E.J. Young's first 100 days in office. We're going to be looking at some of the successes that he believes that he has, some of the questionable stuff, and some of the things that he's put to the back burner. Then we're going to be moving on into E's approval rating. Do people think he's doing a good job? Where is his standing with the Korean populace? What do the opposition think about President E and his job so far? And then finally, or not finally, we're going to be jumping into the tariff deal that was sought between the US and South Korea. The good, the bad, the pretty ugly. And then finally, we'll be ending with the Hyundai plant fallout, the disaster that is the Hyundai plant. We'll get more into that as we get towards the end of the show. But before we jump into any of that, I do have to say, please leave a like, subscribe, comment, as I want to grow this channel and definitely give you guys more news on what's happening here in South Korea. Okay, so let's jump into the news. Our first story today is E.J. Myung's first 100 days in office. And so I kind of wanted to give a little bit of context from his administration to be fair, to judge him more holistically as we look into his administration. So let's take a look at E.J. Myung, and this is from the Korean Herald. This is a transcription of what he said in his acceptance speech. And there's just a lot of interesting things that are here. And let's just go ahead and dive in a little bit. This is a quote from E.J. Myung. Regrettably, at this critical juncture, we face complex, intertwined crises in every area: people's livelihood, the economy, diplomacy, security, and democracy. The present and future of Korea are both at risk. To rescue the lives of weary citizens, to restore democracy and peace, to recover growth and our damaged national dignity will require unimaginable sweat, tears, and patience. Now, I wanted to read that because it gives a context of what is E thinking? What is E, the moment that E's in, what is he thinking? Now, we have to remember, E became president um, after a tumultuous self coup by former President Yoon. So when he got into office, and I want to be completely fair to him, when he got into office, he had the hard task of, on day one, when inaugurated, jumping right in. There was no transition team. There's no transition committee. He had to govern on day one. And after 6 months of no head of state. We ran through 5 different presidents or acting presidents at that time. So to be completely fair, the country was in a difficult position. His first 100 days was essentially restoring the state back to just a normal net zero position. Um, so I want to give him some grace. I want to give him some courtesy when we come to, okay, well, what could he actually accomplish in the first 100 days? However, I do want to criticize some of the moves that he's made, some of the decisions that he's made, as I don't think he's done a perfect job, but I don't think he's done particularly a bad job. I want to read another quote. This is from that same speech, and I want to capture in on something because I think it speaks to where he's thinking and where his mindset is, right? Where is he seeing his presidency and sees himself, how he's moving this government? So, with the resolve to battle a recession head on, we will immediately activate an emergency economic response task force. We will use national finances as a priming pump to restart a virtuous economic cycle. And I just want to state, he did do that. He did do that. The stimulus cards that he created did help, boost the economy. And then he coupled that, which I thought was really smart, with industrial policy. Some of it I think is a little dumb, industrial policy, but he did couple it with industrial policy. It continues. The newly launched administration of the Democratic Party and President Lee Jae-myung will be a just and inclusive government, as well as a pragmatic one. And I really want to stick on that, a pragmatic administration, because Lee Jae-myung, from the moment he started his campaign, has been speaking about how he's going to govern pragmatically. And I find this a little, what's the word I'll use? Interesting. Because, well, what is pragmatic? That's such a undefined, ill-defined word, pragmatic. Because this is Lee Jae-myung when he was running in 2021. His, this is him speaking to the press, and he says, quote, pro-Japanese collaborators worked with the, quote, U.S. occupying forces to maintain the same ruling structure as the colonial period. Lee said during his visit, we did not establish a state with a clean start. We were unable to purify the country of pro-Japanese remnants, and they remain to this day. Now, he got a lot of slack, or excuse me, he got a lot of flack for calling the U.S. An occupying force. Now, do I disagree with him? I think that's missing the point. I think that's rather irrelevant. I think what's important, from the Korean perspective, is that they consider that an incredibly left wing position, and his position is incredibly progressive here at the time. And so when he says, well, we are going to be a pragmatic, I'm going to govern pragmatically, it's something that he's been saying from the campaign trail, something that he's been saying from day one in office. Well, I get the feeling, and I think a lot of the general public gets the feeling of what does pragmatic mean to them? Because he continues in his initial speech, he says, from now on, there is no issue of progressivism. From now on, there is no issue of conservatism. There are only the people's issues, only the problems of Korea. And then it continues. The Lee Jae-myung government will be a, quote, pragmatic and market oriented government. Market oriented government. And you're pragmatic, you're market oriented. That does not sit comfortable with me. And here's why. There are so many issues here that, you know, there are so many issues here that need to be highlighted in South Korea. You have the wage disparity between men and women. You have the mandatory military service question. You have the work culture and the inability. You have the birth crisis. You have so many social issues that are going on here. And for him to say that he's going to be bringing pragmatic solutions that are market oriented, hint to me that social reform, which social reform is difficult. Social reform is hard. You know, we're talking about constitutional reform. That's another question that's been brought up by the Koreans within the context of the Democratic Party and the PPP. And so when you see that he's leaning towards a more market oriented, a more market driven solutions, to me, when you couple that with the talk of, well, I'm not ideological, you know, it's it looks like a politician who is being calculating. It looks like a politician who's being, and I'll use this example. When the stock market goes up, which it will after 6 months of not having a president in the Blue House, after 6 months of rolling acting presidents, When the stock market goes up, you can point to the Kospi and say, look, I've made improvements without substantively on the ground making any true improvements. And so I want to jump around. I'm going to jump around a little bit. Let's take a look at this because this is from the same speech. And before I do that, I want to be super, super fair to EJ Young. He wrote in his initial speech. He said, we will unwaveringly pursue the task of social reform in the Plaza of Light. So he's saying here in his inaugural speech that he will pursue social reform. Okay, but what social reform? How? What are you going to pursue? What specifically are you going to do? Okay, let's look at that. With large scale investments in advanced industries like AI, semiconductors, and semiconductors, we will leap forward as an industrial powerhouse. We will swiftly transition to a renewable energy society to respond to a global crisis, boost corporate competitiveness through energy independence, and RE100 compliance, and revitalize declining regions by building an energy superhighway that enables renewable energy production everywhere in the country. I love that second part. I love that second part. Resting on your laurels, being invested in the renewable energy, that's all great. Helping to rebuild areas of the country that don't have industry in them, these are all fantastic and laudable goals. But I want to hyper focus for just a second on with large scale investments in industries like AI. That terrifies me. That terrifies me. And I'm going to do a video later on why that terrifies me. But this AI, I personally, and I'm going to try to not get sidetracked. I personally believe AI is the biggest load of crap that I've seen since NFTs. Um, it is the next big thing to come and go. Um, and he has been talking about, to try to stay focused, he has been talking about AI investment since he ran in the primary. So this is something that he does care about. This is something that he does believe in. But the question becomes, should we be investing hundreds of billions of dollars into AI? But we'll move that question for later, right? We'll move that question for later because we're talking about the promises that EJ Young made, the promises that, okay, we are going to create reform. We are going to be a market oriented. We're going to be a market oriented country. Okay. Well, let's take a review. Let's take a look at EJ Young and the wins that he says he's made. So this is from The Diplomat. This is a transcript of his speech. He had a 100-day speech where he sat down. It was very long, it was very in-depth, and he talked about a lot of things: the good, the bad, the ugly, the trade deal with the Trump administration. He talked about foreign policy, which I think he said some really fun and interesting things during some of the talk within foreign policy. But he wanted to focus, and I highlighted this, and I'm pulling this because I think this is important for us to get an understanding of kind of where E's mindset is at, right? So let's take a look at this. Again, this is from The Diplomat. South Korean president holds press conference to mark 100 days in office. Reiterated, can't speak today. He reiterated his vision to restore the country's democratic system while touching on foreign policy issues. And at that time, I believe, this is September 11th, the Hyundai plant incident had just happened a few days prior. So there was a lot to speak on. But this says, and this is a quote from me, he said, the past 100 days had been a time for recovery and restoration. And I can agree with that. Like I said before, I can agree with that. When you look at broadly where this country was, where South Korea was trying to come back from, the country was in a position economically to where GDP growth was, I think they brought it down to 0.8% is what the last I saw of the anticipated growth prior to E getting into office and being elected. So yes, the country was in a position where it needed direction, and I think that was the thing that was dragging down the economy, not to mention a bunch of other factors. But it continues. Um, the restoration of the country, since South Koreans had to witness an unprecedented event invoked by former President Yoon and his party. Although Yi had to immediately jump to take up the presidency without having a transition period, blah, 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 like we had spoken, he pointed to his record by the Kospi. Look at the Kospi. Look at the stock market. The stock market has increased. Look how much we are improving. And then continues, vowing to build a solid society for the lives of the people. He also reiterated his willingness to tackle the country's sluggish consumption, which again he did. The I cannot understate the intelligence of doing the stimulus cards. Those help those help generate consumption domestically. And I think that is something that was needed to be invested in. You stimulate consumption while building up your industrial base, right? However, let me continue reading. With the great people of South Korea, I am confident that we can overcome any difficulties, he said. During his address, he also said that a captain of the ship of South Korea, he will make South Korea a real sovereign country where people can feel like they are masters of the country and achieve happiness together. Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. I'm happy he said that. I'm happy. However, you still have some of the highest suicide rates in the OECD. You still have huge wage disparity between men and women. You still have, I mean, there are so many issues. The mandatory military service, there are so many issues that have either been ignored, that have either been not discussed. LGBT rights. I mean, you can go on. Anti discrimination laws. You can go on and on and on. That these conversations aren't even happening from this administration. And the reason I am being so critical of the E administration so far is they have a near supermajority, in the National Assembly. That is hard to argue with. The PPP, the major conservative opposition, cannot stop them from passing legislation. So you have the two wings of, of government that there are two branches of government that are needed to pass law. And it feels as though there's been a slow roll to getting out major legislative reform. Now, I will steel man the east side. They did get major accomplishments done, and I'm going to do a video on it. The yellow envelope law, a fantastic piece of legislation. Fantastic piece of legislation. They have gotten that passed through Parliament. Judicial reform. They're currently working on judicial reform, prosecution reform. They are currently working on it. However, for me, it seems like the fights that they're choosing to pick are fights that they know are going to go down well with the public. Again, very calculating, very, analytical versus, I mean, again, Lee Jae-myung, and we'll jump into this in our next block, is rather popular. Um, but I think at least speaking on those issues, making an effort to discuss those issues, making it a more public conversation would help to not just boost, but help to boost the morals of the people who are struggling. I mean, he promised in his uh, uh, both the primary and in the campaign, both the conservative and liberal candidate promised to incorporate a 4-day work week. Um, I believe he specifically promised a 4.5-day work week and didn't eventually turn it into a 4-day work week. But these are things that I think need to be pointed out. Is that when you look at the E.J. Young administration, overall, do I think the administration is doing well? Yes. Do I think the administration is doing good things? Yes. However, I think within the first 100 days, especially looking at foreign policy, which we will jump into later, that's why I'm reserving myself because there's a lot to speak on. I think I think to kind of play with the foreign policy at least a little bit. I think when it comes to foreign policy, there's this let's continue things as normal, or at least there was initially this feeling of let's just maintain normality, right? Let's just business as usual. And I don't think that is a process that uh, uh, we are no longer in that society anymore. Society is no longer business as usual, and I think there is this willingness and this desire by the administration, specifically on foreign policy, to continue business as usual, which is understandable. However, on domestic policy here in South Korea, I think there has been an aversion to doing anything that would be deemed hard. The yellow envelope law was always going to pass. It's an easy bill. And the general public was kind of prepped for the yellow envelope law. If I'm not mistaken, it's been in the National Assembly since 2014. People have been talking about that law. So that was not something that was new. However, taking any risk, I've not seen this administration take any risk in trying to pass any hard legislation. And that's been, I think, my biggest takeaway of his first 100 days is play it safe, don't ruffle any feathers, do the things that you know you can do, which are easy. And there is some legitimacy. I'm not going to discount that. There is some legitimacy to maintaining your honeymoon period, maintaining the general public. I mean, again, there was so much instability here in South Korea for over 6 months. So, by coming in and going, you know what? We're just going to maintain. You know what? We're just going to play it safe. I can understand that desire. However, what I am saying is there should be, at least some, I don't want to say, there should be some conversation on how do we get, how do we get the wage gap closed, between men and women? How do we have, the workplace, uh, 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 workplace, not bullying, well, yes, workplace bullying, workplace cultures change? This social conversation is not even being had. And I think that's one of the more interesting takes about the first 100 days of the E administration. But do people actually think E's even doing a good job? But do people feel like he's doing a good job? And I'm going to cover more of that, in the next vlog. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked the video, go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, and if you have a comment, go ahead and put one down there. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.